I'm the people lead for the operations and data circle at Aroundtech since roughly a year now. I'm a studied computer scientist, so I have a strong engineering background. I joined the company a couple of years ago already, and then basically moved my way towards Ruby engineering and ops engineering, and now I'm leading a couple of teams, which is super nice. Happy to work with everybody here. Everybody's great. And I'm going to be your MC tonight. Feel free to approach me with any sorts of questions, spontaneous talks, whatever you like. Happy to help. And here we are. This is our agenda for tonight. First of all, Stefan will say hello, everybody, and drop some buzzwords. Essentially, no, we're going to talk about the things that move the company right now. We're going to talk about product fit, a little bit agile as far as I know, these kinds of things. Really looking forward to that. I'm happy to have Yair with me tonight. He's going to talk about DevOps and how can we try to define it better in a way. We have Tobi. Most of the people might know him, Rugby Berlin organizer. He's talking about validations, callbacks in Rails. I think there's lots of stuff to learn, especially in our company here, since we are kind of Ruby based in various regards. And afterwards, there's, as I said, pizza and beer and socializing. That said, I would say let's just dive in with a big hand, right? Give Stefan some applause.
Cool. Thanks, Hendrik. So let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Stefan Heimann. I'm CTO at Aroundtech for about 1.5 years now. Previously Bereichsleiter IT. Previously worked for a large organization, and I also got a background in computer science, so also know a little bit of tech. A little bit about us. Where are we? We are Aroundtech. Originally founded as Käuferportal 12 years ago, so that makes us quite oldish in the startup space. We rebranded about a year ago with Aroundtech, have a narrow focus now, products around the house. A couple of other things that you can read here. From a tech perspective, we've grown the team to 75 people end of last year, and we will certainly grow this, or continue to grow this. We have 2 actually locations. Main location here is here in Berlin. We have another location in the Ukraine. Teams working together, and I think we are fully buzzword compliant. There's very few buzzwords that we don't cover, and those who we don't cover yet, we are preparing to cover in the near future. Just to give you some examples, what we did, we migrated to AWS last year, and I'm quite proud that we managed to do the migration in 3 months. If somebody had told me that this was possible, I would have said, no way. The team managed to do this, and actually the last migration on the last Saturday, I was just reading Slack, and afterwards I really asked the team if that was real, or if it was a replay, because everything went as planned, and I've never seen a large database migration going as planned, but just a great team. Other topics that we're doing, we've implemented, or in the process of implementing Agile, so we introduced Scrum last year. We hired our first Scrum Master last year, hired just our second Scrum Master earlier this year in the rollout process of doing that. And I strongly believe in agility and driving this towards the business. So when you would go back and ask what are our business goals for this year, one of the biggest goals we have is improving our product, and product in the sense that the techies understand product. And actually that's the biggest thing for me for this year, that we improve our product market fit. We have a great product at the moment for our key account customers, but we found out that the product is not so great for the small and medium enterprises, and we're just in the process of actually working on that, establishing that. And I find this is great because I can really work on it, and for me this is like a small startup in a slightly larger startup. Yeah, and basically that's it, what we're doing. I hope you enjoy today. We try to do these external tech talks regularly because we believe in sharing information, sharing knowledge, and also building networks. We do the tech talks internally every 2 weeks, and the external ones about once a quarter. And as Hendrik already said, there's pizza and there's beer. I hope when you leave, both is empty. And with that, I hand over to Hendrik. Thank you.
And with that said, just very short, welcome on stage, Yair, Polar Squad DevOps Tech Lead. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Okay. This was not planned. Okay, this was planned. So, yeah. So, the talk is about DevOps, a search for a better definition. And you can read the quote for Walter Benjamin. And it will come more clear when I keep talking. The idea is that when we look at stars, we make the constellations. And now I'm going to show you a little bit of a constellation and stars that are DevOps. So first of all, who am I? I'm Yair Etziony. I'm DevOps Leads Germany Polar Squad. I have over 20 years experience as sysadmin, QA, DevOps expert. Studied philosophy, German history of ideas. I'm also a musician. And that's my Twitter. And I will start with a personal note. So, in 2014, I decided that I will not work anymore in IT, and I quit. I was going full-time, music career, having time, doing touring, and whatever. And at one point, I moved to Germany in idea to pursue career in music. And at some point, I found myself urging a bit to go back to the field that we are all working at. So, and at that time, I started to get a lot of jobs, and they were all about DevOps engineer, which I didn't know before, and I read about it, and it seemed like a system administrator, but with a bit of energy or whatever. And I worked here and there in Berlin, did some jobs, and I always didn't understand why am I called DevOps engineer. I didn't really understand that. And then I met this interesting group of people that I'm proud to be part of, Polar Squad. And I think the first thing that clicked between us was that I said in the job interview that DevOps is a culture. And pretty soon after I started working, I was hospitalized in Berlin. I had 2 stones in my kidney, and I had a lot of free time and a Wi-Fi. So I read a lot of articles in a very short time. I saw a lot of YouTube lectures, and things started to tick in my head. I started to understand something, and I want to do this journey with you guys because all of us work in this field, I guess, and we all see those same mistakes coming back again and again. And my idea is to ask why. So, first of all, why DevOps? Things started to change the last couple of years, I would say. We started to build software in a different way. So we started to see things that are infrastructure as code. The thing that is interesting about infrastructure as code, that if you have a perspective like me of more than 20 years, you remember that you was waiting months for the servers to arrive. No deployments at that time. So infrastructure as code is amazing in the fact that you can build and destroy infrastructure. Unimaginable. We take it for granted. It's not. We added containers. We added version control, which works really well with both the first ones. We started to work at the cloud, which is very open. And we got agile. So we started to release software really fast. And we started to understand that our old ways can't work because we need to do things in a different way. And a little bit of historical background. In 2003, Google started site reliability engineering. The idea is to take the big problem that we have between developers and operators because they have different needs and different perspectives, and to change them. Then Flickr starts to deploy 10 times a day. And in 2009, the word DevOps is started by Patrick Dubois, wanted to do an agile system administrating thing, but started a tag at Twitter which says DevOps. So, what is DevOps? So I would say, and you might not agree with me, DevOps is a loose set of practices, guidelines, and culture designed to break down silos in IT, operation, networking, and security. Sharing and collaboration are at the forefront of this movement. So DevOps is a cultural change. Okay, so what is culture? The ideas and customs and social behavior of particular people or society. Okay, so I have Karl Marx, who claims that culture is something that goes against workers and people like us. It's used to make us do things that we don't like. And we, of course, Frankfurt-Schule, which I really like, but not so relevant, just a picture. And now we have the 3 pillars of the DevOps success: collaboration and trust, automation and measurement, continuous improvement. So it sounds like a good objective for a culture. Okay. This is an example of a DevOps engineer job offer. The profile has nothing to do with culture. This is a system engineer's job profile. And this is where it starts to be interesting, because we want to have a change that is technological and cultural, but we actually hire people that are tech experts. So this is a start of a fail already, because we are missing half of what we want to achieve. This is a version of a song that was sent to me by a recruitment agent. It's a poem, actually. It's a beautiful poem. It means that if you know one thing about what we do in infrastructure, you know that Docker and Kubernetes are basically the same thing in a way. They work together. You don't choose between them. And this is where I add another layer of unprofessionalism. So I might be laughing, but there's a lot of hard truth behind what I say. So in our field, there are recruiters, and most of them don't know what they're talking about. And so they add another layer of complexity into a field that is already half professional. That's the truth. Okay, so we have DevOps, and then we have a new creature that arrives in the world, the DevOps engineer. So what's their relation? You know what this picture is from? Cultural Revolution in China. So these people really wanted to engineer culture. It didn't work. Like, a lot of people died, the economy was destroyed. So how can we engineer culture? I mean, that's something that was really annoying me, because we might laugh about everything I talk about. It sounds absurd, but people put a lot of thought into these things. I mean, people don't just post job interview to make you laugh. Somebody was thinking about it seriously, but not seriously enough, I guess. So, I mean, infrastructure engineer, system administrator, system engineer, yeah, I did all these jobs, but what of that makes me qualified to do a change in culture? How do I see culture? I know how to SSH to Linux. I know how to do MongoDB, I don't know. I know how to do all that stuff, but where's the DevOps? Like, where is the DevOps in those things? So, why like this is a very Israeli phrase to say, and it means why are you acting like that? So, classic Western way of solving problems is by shooting masses of humans' resources on a problem. So that's what a lot of companies do. They just hire 7, 8, 9 DevOps engineers who actually not really doing exactly what they're supposed to do, but they're stuck. And we have Brooks' law. that says that adding manpower to a late software projects make it later, because there's a lot of hassle about that. So what we're doing is we're doing the thing that happened in World War I, 1917, like we actually have a problem that is a methodological, systematical problem, and we're using weird tools. We think they're going to solve the problem with us with a materialistic way, but the problem might not be materialistic. It's something else. It's an idea. Oh. So now we go to another part, breaking silos. So my question is, how can you break a silo if you are a silo? I mean, you can do that. One of my colleagues is doing that, but in order to do that, you need to be prepared to understand that you build a team that is a silo to break other silos. And all of us were in this situation. I mean, you build some amazing Puppet manifests that then you left and nobody could use them. You got things that you never liked, or there's another thing. Your team works really fast and agile, but they're not in correlation with the rest of the company, because business, apparently, I don't see them agile, and other departments, they won't be agile too. So this is something that is more interesting than just, let's release software really fast. It's not about releasing software really fast alone. If you don't release software really fast, you definitely cannot do the DevOps. It's sort of like both of them need to bootstrap each other in a really weird way. You need to have the culture that wants the change, and you cannot have the change if you don't have the tools to do that. Okay, so I'm not just negative. So we agree that DevOps have some strong cultural side to it, yet the profile of the people we are looking for are normally system engineers. So this is a problem. So if the work is cultural, why do we look for technical expert? And I would even add, how do you find cultural experts? What is a cultural expert? So here's an option. Netflix. I would just like to add one thing. So in all these things, there's always companies that are more avant-garde, and there's the companies that imitate. And for me, I'm not super big fan of a Netflix or anything, but I think they're doing things sort of like they lead the way for a lot of other companies. And let's look at this job offer. I mean, again, somebody was putting a lot of thought into this. So this senior resilience engineering advocate for Netflix. And the goal for him is the education on the function of SRE's team to improve reliability and resilience of Netflix, focusing on people within the company, since it's normal, everyday work of Netflix employee that create our availability. So we have a guy in a company that basically would have strong technical skills, but I guess knows how to talk to people and advocate inside the company, something that a lot of companies never think about, which is reliability. How many companies think about reliability or security when they start a product? Not so many. So, and the second interesting thing is that Netflix is a socio-technical system. It formed from the interaction of people and software and constantly undergoing change. This is not just lip taxes. This is, I believe, but something they truly, truly believe at. And I think the undergoing change is very, very important to achieve DevOps as a culture. So I go back to the same point. How do you do it? So the example comes from Netflix. You look for some people that are willing and wanting to change culture, because DevOps is very young. And I don't think it's been taught so much in computer science schools. So we build something from scratch. We have to bootstrap the profession. So, and we are now heading to the second age of DevOps. So we stop thinking about it as just automation, and we have to think about it as holistic approach to software development. And even I would say a holistic approach to production, or how to produce products. Okay, so we defined everything from above. Now let's do the simple stuff. Let's define from downstairs. So let's look at the tools that are considered to be DevOps in 2015 and now. So we had Chef and Puppet, AWS, Jenkins. Yeah, we love Jenkins. And nowadays, I would say Google Cloud, Helm, Terraform, Kubernetes. I would say this is more developer-oriented. This is super or operation-oriented. This is definitely operations tool. They think of a sysadmin in the center. Look, for example, on the user interface of AWS and the user interface of Google. This is more developer-oriented, and this is more operation-oriented. Which DevOps tools are going to be in 2025? All right? So we understand that the tools are not the most important thing here, yet all the job people, the people who look you for the job, they always put, we need someone who knows Chef for 10 years. Okay. So now we get to this. What is not DevOps? Because you cannot find a good definition only from defining it from the good part. You need to define the negative part of it. And DevOps is not coupled to any tools. It's not about Kubernetes. It's not about Chef. It's not about Terraform. And you read, I guess, that article that says that if you don't do serverless in 2020, you're not doing DevOps. So he lied to you, that guy. He was lying because it has nothing to do with that. It's a cultural change. Ask yourself, I mean, I don't know how many people, anybody here is doing DevOps? You? Yeah. Everybody here is labeled as a DevOps engineer, system administrator with a DevOps mindset, something creepy like that? No. Yeah, no, you make everything. You are the all-around guy that is there all the time. So, do you actually work in a DevOps environment? I mean, I have to say the truth. No, I don't remember me working in a DevOps environment except for when I do what I do now. I was always seeing myself as I'm a system engineer and I'm called DevOps engineer, but we don't talk to the developers and they have their own thing and then they throw it to us, silos. Okay, so now we reach a new guy, the DevOps consultant. And as much as you think that I'm doing a sales pitch here, I was giving 2 months thinking about it at least, or at least some long time. And this is why I chose to be DevOps consultant. You bring an outside perspective. It's so much easier to make a change when you're from the outside than from the inside. You bring an holistic approach because you do DevOps. You don't do cloud, lift and shift, engineering. You don't do that. You're not cloud engineer that does DevOps. You're not software developer that does DevOps. You look at everything from all the corners of it. You're lean. The idea is that you come, you mentor, you empower, and you can go. And it's cheap, or at least sort of cheap. It's high level or hands-on, and it fits into the DevOps mindset because it's lean and because of all those things I said before. Yes, trust me. And now, SREs and DevOps. So a lot of people mix those things, but actually SRE is a well-defined role and it's about software reliability. They're dealing with monitoring, alerts, events, incidents report, postmortem, planning. They are coming from Google, and Google say that they are part of the DevOps movement. But unlike DevOps, SRE has a very rational thing to do. They measure things, they check things, and they make them resilient. That's easy. That's actually a well-defined role, but nothing too complicated. But sometimes you do DevOps, but you are doing also SRE. I mean, I was at that role. What am I doing now? Am I SRE or am I DevOps? So things happen. And now, for almost the last part, I brought the last elephant that we didn't talk about. Because you cannot talk about DevOps now without talking about Kubernetes. Everybody wants Kubernetes. So we can talk about it a bit. So as you can see, many people couple it with DevOps. And it's got a nice logo, and it's part of the CNCF, and it's super cool. And it's also a game changer, because it's API-driven, declarative, it's got the operator baked inside. It shifts the way we think about infrastructure. It's YAML-based, which I don't like, but okay. And it's cloud-native. It's a word everybody likes. So it's actually cool in a way, but not everybody needs it. But everybody wants it. And for me, a very interesting part of this was when VMware was buying Hiptio and Pivotal, and they added support to Kubernetes to the vSphere product, which means that Kubernetes is going to be legacy sooner or later. So all the cool stuff you learn is going to be useless, or you're going to work for a bank then. Maybe. The thing that is interesting about Heptio, it was a company started by, if I'm not mistaken, Joe Beda, and he was one of the guys who made Kubernetes. So he knows what he's talking about. But this is an interesting thing. It means that at one point, Kubernetes is not going to be so cool anymore. I'm sorry, but it's going to be like that. And we will have different tools. And those are the tools of 2025, when I don't know which tools. But because I have a really long perspective on our field, more than 25 years, how many cool things we had already, and they all went to the legacy world. Yeah. So we cannot end this thing without the future of DevOps. So DevSecOps is really nice because it deals with security, automation, and it fits really well with AI. Developer-centric environment, this is the place what we're going to. Yeah, IT department don't bring value. So the people that bring value are developers. So we want developers to work fast and lean and have the best environment. And this is what DevOps also supposed to do. Cultural ideas will be the next big thing in R&D teams, I hope, because we need that. Cross-functional teams and business logic will at the end be connected to DevOps. And we will write code that will glue the infrastructure, and I think the most important part for people like me will be mentoring and guiding. And so, DevOps will die. And it will die because at the end of the day, we will automate everything, and the role is not well defined. It mixes praxis and cultural movement. So, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Enlightening, actually, broadening the scope of this whole thing. I think we have time for a handful of questions, and I'm going to be the runner, but since I got the microphone, I have the first question for you. Thanks for pointing out the future of DevOps and like the where does it go and stuff. When you, like, I believe, or I would agree that we would have to think about starting to roll out DevOps and like reliability engineers around products, for example, like over the whole company kind of attitude, right? Automate everything, not only within IT scope, but like generally everywhere, which is the usual trend, right? And easy to identify and see. What is a good first place to start with outside of IT?
I would say talking to the management and making them understand that this whole thing has to start from above to down. And everybody should be aligned. So there should not be this thing that we have rivalries between teams, but we have, everything should be one silo instead of small silos. And business should understand the developers. HR should understand, everybody should be somehow aligned. I'm not sure how it will be, but this is where we want to be. So we will have short feedbacks and short releases time, but they will make sense, because think about this, how many times you work in a situation where you released stuff really fast, but the business logic was not in line with that. So I would guess this is the things that are really most important in that field.
Lots of discussion, I see.
Yeah.
It's cool. Any more questions? Room for questions, room for questions. Over there, can somebody please hand the microphone?
Thank you,
Yeah.
first of all. One thing I would like to ask is, how do you see like the role of complexity, like also in our tool chain, like evolving over time, and how, in your opinion, is the like people or the people's responsibility who employ like the DevOps culture? How do we counteract this additional complexity? Because you mentioned the tool chain, it's really cool. Like I FTP'd a Perl script like in 2006 to a server and that was done. And now like we have Docker and Docker isn't enough. So we have Kubernetes and Kubernetes is also just a big ass layer over Docker and like whatever. How do you see this complexity changing over time?
Okay, I think Kubernetes is sort of paving the way for you, for the way I see it. Because Kubernetes already removed a lot of hand work. It added a layer of complexity, but then when you actually understand it and know how to work, it makes your life a bit more easy. So I would guess that we will go slowly to those places, like places where a lot of the work is done outside, not by the developers or by the engineers, and you will have strict knowledge about certain areas. So the complexity would be taken away from you, and you will be more and more into producing your software, while somebody else will take care of the dirty nits and bits behind you. That's one of my guesses. And a second guess would be that, again, you can do it with empowering people and giving them more responsibilities, creating a sort of this society where everybody have a room to give something and they feel proud of it. And so then it's complex, but it's not rocket science, right? So we can learn it.
Thank you. Yes, there.
Hi, thanks. About 10 or 15 years ago, I was a really good software developer and I ended up in management for some strange reason nobody really understands. And I have a large group of developers now who clamored hands and feet that they get DevOps on Teams and that will help them. And now all of the developers go, it's not my problem why it doesn't deploy. It's cultural, as you say, and I agree with that. How do I convince the developers that making stuff deploy and getting stuff to work is still their problem?
You introduced the error budget. We can talk about it after that. I mean, if you do the error budget, like the Google thing, the SRE thing, they at one point will understand that they can't deploy anymore. And yeah, this is definitely a way of making things, people share responsibility, because we know the developers, they like new features, but they don't want to take responsibility over those things they break, right? So error budget is a very nice idea to do that. So yeah.
Cool. I think we have room for one more question. Is there one more question? Actually, I might have one. We might postpone the answer because it might get longer or something. You said that like ultimately DevOps will die, lots of things will be automated, culture will take over. That's the future, right? Now, very creative and open space for the answer, but what's the future of the future? I mean, after we have been automating everything and like optimized culture and everybody's like super free and all these kinds of things, where will we be? What will our next challenges be?
I think the software will be created without us. We just define what we want and it will happen. I mean, at the end of the day, machine learning can go there, right? But also when the DevOps will die is also a bit of just a little bit to annoy people a bit with it. I'm not sure completely it's going to die, because there's one thing I learned in life: people will always need someone to jumpstart that one server that starts everything. So I remember I was 35 or something and people told me they will never use us anymore, we're dead. And I told them, no, there will always be someone who knows how to use terminal someone like us will always have a job because worst case, I mean, I'm 45, so.
All right.
Yeah.
Hopefully in the future of the future, AI doesn't teach us and machine learning doesn't optimize me. With that said, big hand to Yair. Thank you very much for your talk. Thank you. Welcome on stage. Toby, you're talking about validations in Rails, and I guess we have lots of stuff to learn. Please give a warm applause.
Welcome and thank you. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay, I hear myself double, but I'll deal with that. Cool. So I guess most of us here are like web developers, like Ruby, Rails developers, something. Not actually most, but okay, some form of web development. So we want to build a new thing. We decided we don't like Meetup because Meetup wants to take lots of money from us, and we're like, nah. So we build our own event platform. And so we create a form. We want to create a new event like this one, has a name, has a location, a date, and then at some point the crew arrives, the performers arrive, the talks start, etc., etc. And then we look at it and we go like, it's pretty repetitive, you know, we want to have those date times, but like no need to like repeat the date all the time. So we want to have it like this. We just enter the date once and then all the times because we decided our events are all going to be on one day. You know, we don't have overnight events, you know, like these meetups usually don't go that long. Easy enough, so it's much better. What do we do now? We're Rails developers, so what do we do? I don't want you to read all of this code, but you know, we just decide, okay, what does Rails give us? So we're gonna do it before validation. So we're just gonna enter the times, and before those kick in, what this thing essentially does is it just takes all the date time fields and just sets the date to the date that is in the date attribute. And all of a sudden, we can do it like this. We can create a new Aroundtech event, just give the date and the times, and after we check if it's valid, our callback will run, and then it will all have the correct date. And that is amazing, yay, woo, works. So that's some bit of good old Rails magic. We don't need to tell it anything, it just works. It just does its thing, and it's like, all there, and we're super happy. Now, some point later, we want to write a test. So we have some kind of factory. Factories have like default values for like date and whatnot, and we want to create a new event, and we want the event to end in 2042. So, and then in our test, we use Auspex. At first, okay, there the font is broken. You can sort of read it. At first, our data is correct, but then after we save it, because saving triggers validation, it triggers the before validation, and that sets its date back to whatever the factory set the date to. So all of a sudden, our date is Sunday, 24th of February. And good luck debugging that, especially when you are, well, that's kind of surprising because we told it like you'll end in 2042, and now we're in 2019, so it's magic time travel. But have fun debugging this like half a year down the road, you know? You wrote this callback half a year ago, or one of your colleagues wrote it half a year ago. You want to write a test and you just expect the factory to do what you want it to do. So we have the same thing again, and then we just wrote a new query object. And then we want the query to be future events, and we want it to include all the events that are 23 years in the future. At this point, we have no idea why it doesn't work, and we will never go and look for that before validation thing and be like, hey, why does this change the date? Because we're going to assume that our query is going to be wrong, because that's what we just implemented, and we clearly tell it you're going to be in 2042, so whatever we did now is wrong, and we'll spend a day debugging this, most likely. And sadly, I'm not making this up. This is an example from a code base, slightly adapted, and I spent a day debugging this, and I didn't feel like, yay! So, what I think is that these before validation callbacks, and most callbacks, but especially this one, are smell. Because like, why does the model clean up? Why is it the model's job to clean up some data just because we wanted a view to look different? Because of that, suddenly we have some before validation code all the way down the model. Why do we do this? Why do we need this? So that was about callbacks, but now let's have a little look at validations. And for that, I took a look at GitLab. GitLab is open source. And I took a look at the user model. And I found this. And what you can see here is that after that, basically all these validations, they are conditional. So we only check that it's a unique email if the email changed. We only change if, we only validate if we own the notifications email, if that one changed, and so forth. And it's like, why, didn't people tell us, you just define all those validations in your model and then you will always run them and everything's going to be great? Why are we doing, so much work to see that we don't run the validations? So why all that effort? And I can tell you why that effort, because lots of the times these validations are quite costly, Like when I look at the code, I think of a goalkeeper that goes like, oh, don't run this validation, don't run that validation, jumping around trying to catch all those validations, preventing them from running. And that's maybe because they need to do database check or whatnot and makes your system slow. But you might say, but Tobi, validations are very, very fast. If something is present, that's like a microsecond check. However, most validations or lots of validations interact with other objects in the system, which means you have to do database loads. So as an example, when you want to create an appointment in the system for doctors, you might want to double check at the time of the appointment, is the practice open? Is there no overlap with other appointments? Does the doctor that is assigned to treat it have the right skills to treat that particular appointment? Can the patient be contacted in case we need to cancel? And also, of course, all the associated models are also going to be validated. And many more things. And what does this lead to? This leads to you executing tons of validations and loading tons of models, so that what should have been like an easy validation that takes you 1 millisecond or something, all of a sudden runs all of these things. That's why people make them so conditional, because that, if it didn't change, we don't need to check it. The other thing that these validations lead us to is a very expensive test setup. Because in order for one thing to be valid in Rails, all the other models associated to this also have to be valid. And so you start up creating the whole world, We start with the appointment needs a practice. The practice needs to have a region. The region needs to have a building model. I only wanted to write a test for the appointment that, its times can't go over the day or something, but I end up creating the whole world. And at one code base that I worked on, we checked, how many records are created in the database when we use a factory to create basically our base model that we use everywhere. 23. 23 records inserted for creating the most basic thing. And you can just imagine how much that slows down the test suite. I didn't actually show you all of that GitLab code. There's also lots of these conditional checks on the validation, on the callbacks, I'm sorry, because they also double check there that only if this changed. And I want to make clear, I'm not showing this example from GitLab to make fun of GitLab. I'm showing this example because I trust the engineers at GitLab. I think they're very, very good engineers. So I'm saying if they do this, you do it too, like I do it, It's not meant as saying, oh, GitLab is bad. It's meant as saying this is a problem that we're all facing, no matter how good we are. And I ask myself, there's all these validations and callbacks that kind of pollute the base user model. How many ways are there in GitLab to change an email or any one of these emails, and they're all polluted here. I think there's just, the sign up page and maybe the edit page. What else is there to change your email? And it's all here, and it's all with these ifs. And then, I looked at it a bit and was like, okay, this isn't so great. But then one of the things that I do very, very gladly when I look at code and I want to see is, I look at the code comments, because I think most code comments are smell, except for documentation. And I look at this comment, and I was like, oh, in case validation is skipped. It's like, what is this? And then I realized that we run the same callback both before validation and before save, because somebody might skip validations to improve the speed, and then somebody else made a commit that's like, but I really, really need this, even if we skip validation, so we also do it before save. So if we don't skip validation, we just run it twice. It's like, yay, good programming, yay. So again, not on GitLab, but just the kind of things that this drives us to. And this is what I'm asking, why are we doing this? Like, I've done things like this, and like, felt right at the moment, or you don't have the overview, and like, why does this happen? Is what I ask myself a lot. I was like, okay, like there needs to be some sort of reason for this. And bear with me a bit with the reason. And I think the reason is affordances. Does anyone here know what affordances are? Almost no? Yeah, Jan should know. Affordances is a concept I learned in university in a user interaction class. And the way I remembered it is as, objects or things have a way that they communicate how they want to be used. In this case, a door handle. You see a door handle, you got to push it down to open the door. Or a chair, it's like, it's relatively clear what the chair, wants to be done. You want to sit on it. A button wants to be pressed. That's an affordance. So other examples for you, these are bunnies. They would like to be cuddled, obviously. And they also would like to be fed. That's, what bunnies are for. So what does any of this have to do with like validations and callbacks? So we can, or I think we can really nicely apply the concept of affordances to programming. What's an affordance of object under programming? You create an object or like a class that models a domain. You have instances of these things that then model like a problem space, and you implement methods, to get your solutions. That's the OOP affordance. If you did functional programming, it would be more about data structures and functions. Now is the question, what's the affordance of Rails? Model view controller. That's what Rails gives us, You have to have your solution, and you either put it in a model, you put in a view, or in a controller. That's all Rails gives us, like more or less, for most of the problems that we face. And then, Rails, we have this, because like that choice isn't really a choice, because, some of you probably have heard this fat models, skinny controllers mantra. So basically, put all the logic in the models, none of it in the controllers, and also none of it in the view. And it's a fine sentiment, but what it means is that effectively all of our logic, all these validations, callbacks, whatnot, they all end up in the model. And what does this look like? That we have one or two use cases for a thing, but they're then stuck on every model, This code is called so infrequently, but then we have our user file that is 1,000 lines long, or maybe it's just 100 lines long, but includes 50 modules, or I'm exaggerating, that then add up to 1,000 lines of code. So what's happening? We have controllers to call the models. We have a registration controller, has an impact on user. Then we get a user's controller to show them, has an impact on user. And lots of others, and our model gets big and fat and has all this impact of these things, and it's kind of like a wild mixture. Now you might say, but Tobi, I know the solution to this, that's service objects. I heard service objects, we use service objects is cool. And so what is a service object? It's basically take a bit of the business logic, don't put it into a model, but put it into a specific service object. So the graph would look like this. The registrations controller codes some specific registrations service object, and that then codes the model. So the model got a bit thinner, so that's a win, right? So this is not a talk about service objects, but it's a win. I like them. However, we can separate the business logic, but service objects aren't usually about validations and callbacks. They're still in the user model. And I would argue they're even worse, because they're run all the time by default of these validations callbacks. Like the business logic, even if I had it on my module, I decide which method to call. So just run the ones that I need. With the validations and callbacks, still all of them are run. And furthermore, the graph wasn't complete. We also have to think about the view. And it's not like the view isn't calling the controller, most of you know this, but sort of the view is shaping the data that the controller gets. When I have a form and I hit submit, that's the shape of the data that ends up in the controller. So they have a pretty big impact. So it looks more like this. We have a sign-up view, registration controller, maybe a service object, and then user model. So let's have a look at the user model. This is what would qualify as, I don't know, a fairly typical user model. And I just took like some basic registration stuff. And we can see that a lot of this is like sign up and edit action only. Like where else would I validate that my email is there and it's confirmed, password, terms of service, whatnot. Where else will I have to hash the password before I save it? And where else will I need to send a welcome email? It's just cluttered with all of this. Even worse, some of those are, in my opinion, purely view related, you know? The fact that I want to confirm the email address or confirm the password, that is, you know, just in a view. That's an aspect of the view that's not for the model to worry about, I believe. Same for the password accessor, because we don't want to save the password. And this one is just, for me, I don't know why they introduced this, because it's literally like, has a checkbox been checked? You know, it doesn't even get saved in the database. Now with GDPR maybe, but you know, that's what it is there for. Has a checkbox been checked? There's nothing to do with my business logic. It's just, you know, my sign up form and like some other requirements. Why does this end up in the model? So we end up with this whole graph, but in the end, the user model all the way down here, that is the most general thing that we have. It has to know about the structure of the view all the way up there. And that feels wrong to me. Like very, very wrong. Like I need to know that I have like a checkbox to check. I need to know that I have confirms there and whatnot. So I wonder, why do we need to solve this problem all the way down there? And we need to opt out. We need to do all this work to be like, okay, only if this changed, run this validation. Only if that changed, run this callback and stuff. So when I learned Rails, they told me, you know, like, okay, you have all these validations and callbacks, you're gonna run them all the time, it's amazing. And I was like, yeah, that's cool, yay, all the time, it's the best thing. But you know, now it was like, no, actually I don't want to run them all the time, like I don't want to run this one and that one. And it gets even worse, you know, I debugged an actual bug, which was an endless loop, happened on production, where like one model was saved, and then it triggered a before save callback that tried to save another model that then triggered a before save callback this model. And it was like kind of a condition, you know, that only happened on the 24th of the month, you know, during a full moon, and the user's name starts with M or something, you know. It was really, really hard to debug. And, you know, at some point you get this stack level, like stack level too deep, kind of, like, how did I manage to build like an endless loop? I didn't do any recursion. And if you have this and leave it running a long enough time, you get there, and it's very frustrating. So yeah, I wish I could solve it here or there, who knows. So for me, it's like, I want to run exactly the callbacks that I want to run, not the other thing. And that, it's, you know, you've seen me complain about validations and callbacks for almost 20 minutes now, and thank you for still like kind of paying attention to me. But why did I do this? I think it's very important that we understand the problem, or you understand how I see the problem, that we can agree on that. Because if I just talk to you about solutions for a problem that you don't think exists, you know, you will just, you know, bother off and not listen to me. And like, I mean, I stand here in front and I have fun, but you know, you won't have much fun. So the title of this talk is, do you need a validation? Let me call you back about it. My name is Tobi. You can find me almost everywhere on the internet where I want to be found, as @Fracktop. As was said, I've been running the Ruby user group in Berlin for like, I don't know, 7 years or something. I'm the coach of a weekly Code Curious / Rails Codes Berlin study group. I am the maintainer of SimpleCov, which is your Ruby code coverage measurement tool, which just got 0.18 released 2 days ago with branch coverage. So, you know, update and check it out. I need to push out one more bug fix release once the JVM thing on GitHub workflows installs again, but that's a different story. I also do Elixir. I'm also the author of Benchy, which is like kind of the best benchmarking library, period, not only in Elixir, but that is a different topic. And right now I'm a freelancer. I don't know, helping people do open source, helping people learn Elixir, available for, I don't know, some interim, team leading, CTOing, whatever. That's me. I have bunnies. My favorite color is green. The group is called the RubyCons. That's why I have this t-shirt on. And I think that's enough about me, because you don't care so much about me. You hopefully care more about the content. So after this little break, I know it's getting late, let me summarize what I basically said in the 20 minutes before. I think validations and callbacks are bad because the specifics of specific views and interactions that only happen very rarely clutter the model, which is our base thing that we use everywhere, which makes it really, really hard to get an overview of what's actually happened where, you know, because you have this huge thing, you have, at some point you have no idea what uses what validation was built for that screen, what callback for where, and it's a big mess. It's like a big net, basically. And the other problem, like another thing that I'm really, I mean, you could guess from me offering a benchmarking tool, I'm very performance oriented. I love like making Rails apps run fast or run anything run faster so it has an impact for users. Really cool. And then we have all these callbacks that load 200 models into memory, makes things slower. So running them when you don't need them is very, very annoying for me. I feel like I'm just wasting, you know, energy, power, response time, the user's time, whatever. And we're going to look at our active record original model. This is kind of our guideline. We'll try to implement that in different ways now. So the first question, kind of obviously, is like, okay, Tobi, you said we only have model view controller, but Rails surely has things to deal with this, right? So what does Rails offer us? The first thing that you might think of that Rails offers us is concerns, as in the active support concern. And what this basically is, you create a module that can then be included, and then these validations and callbacks that we talked about before are just defined in that module, and we include that module into our user model. And this actually gives us some separation, because then we have the user registration in a separate file, so we can at least see where it came from. However, there's still all the validations and callbacks are executed. So you can think of included as basically just copying this code back into the user model. So while we achieve the level of organization, all of them are still run, and so it's not a big win. The next thing that I actually forgot about until my dear colleague Thiago at the time mentioned it to me is active record suppress, that I think they introduced in Rails 5 or 4, I'm not quite sure anymore. What does suppress do? Does anyone who here knows active record suppress? Exactly. Good, so I shouldn't tell you, but I will very, very briefly. It is a thing that I don't like, which is, so the use case is this, you know, Rails comes basically from Basecamp. Basecamp has lots of projects. It might happen that you want to copy a project somewhere. When you copy the project, you want to recreate all the models, but because it's just a copy, you don't want to send out all the notifications that like a new topic or a new comment was created. So what you can do through the magic of Rails, you just run your copy logic within that block, and it will suppress the creation of all notification objects. Just magically, no notification object will be created, and hence no validation and no callback that is attached to the notification model, which will then, you know, not send an email class because no notification object has been created. I think this is a very, very bad design. It just does some global state around something, tells you to not create anything, and also it doesn't really help with the validations. It just really helps when you don't want that one specific model to be created. And like, as I said, I forgot about it, and I checked both the GitLab and the Discord code bases, and they also don't use it. So you learned about it, you learned it's bad, don't use it. Cool. Another new thing in, I think, Rails 5-ish was that you could give validations and safe, you could give them like a symbol, which is then the context in which it is executed. So instead of your usual validates on, create, update, or whatnot, you could have your own kind of context, which you could then name account setup, and then only execute the validations and callbacks in that one context, which is nice. But the last time I checked, you couldn't give multiple of these. Like you couldn't run something in multiple contexts, and you couldn't have one thing be executed in multiple contexts. So it's very, very limited because, you know, I might want to run this validation on email uniqueness in 2 different contexts. You know, I have no way to do that right now, except for maybe repeating it or whatnot. And so I'm not a big fan of it either. So if everything that Rails gives us does not work, what does work? Is I think the question I've been teasing for the last 25 minutes or so. So the first thing is form objects. And I hope you're better at using them than like this person that has the pen the wrong way around. I don't know why they made the pick like that, but so. This is an example of a form object that implements what we did before. Form objects are basically well, you will see. So this is not any specific library. It uses plain active model, which is built into Rails and it's also actually included into Active Record. I use this because it's usually easier to start using in a company and just be like, okay, I use this as a standard Rails, because you don't have to have the discussion about, oh, I added a new dependency, and people say, whoa, 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 whoa. You can just use it, and it's also very familiar. So let's break this apart. The validations still look exactly the same as before, which is nice. We don't have to learn anything new. We need to add all the attribute accessors because, you know, it's just a class. So for every field that we want to set, we need to have the accessor. And then we just try to emulate the same interface as Active Record does. So our goal is that whoever uses this thing doesn't even know it's just a form object and not a real Active Record object. So we define a save method, wherein we then check valid. Valid will run all the validations as usual in Active Record or whatnot. And then we kind of map it to, I call it base user. It's like now my basic user class, which is just like a plain Active Record thing that doesn't have any or many validations. And then we call save on that user and we're good. Our callbacks are not really callbacks because we just call them when we want to call them. So instead of having a callback for hashing the password, we just pass in a function or a method that returns the hashed password. And we send the welcome email exactly when we want. You know, after the user was successfully saved, we send the welcome email. Everything great. And then in the controller, it's the exact same interface. You know, we create it, we pass in the params that all works through active model, then we save it, and we're good. And that is something that you can implement very, very easily in your company. And that just really takes all of these validations and callbacks, puts it on a separate layer after the controller, and puts them to be very, very interaction specific. You know, I just run these in this interaction, and then I don't care about them anymore, and they don't clutter any other code. I'm a big fan of form objects. Also, form object is a topic of 40 minutes by itself. I forgot to mention this. This talk is more meant to make you curious and maybe look into the technology or the approach that you like. Like, I won't be able to fully teach you form objects, and like I have 5 minutes for each thing. So the next thing is something that in Rails we don't do a lot, or it's also sometimes a bit frowned of, is inheritance. So how does inheritance help us? I'll show you a new solution. Looks similar. I've seen this before. This is a library called Active Type from my friends named Markandra. They're like an agency in southern Germany, I think Augsburg. Yes, Augsburg. So this is the original, and this is Active Type. And you can see it looks exactly the same, except for that one dreaded line up there. So what does Active Type do? You basically tell it, and there's kind of fancy metaprogramming used there. You just tell it, okay, user, you will act as a sign-up now, and that inheritance from the Active Type record user makes sure that it handles single table inheritance and the roads, etc., as if it were a user. Because otherwise, you know, the auto-generated routes, when you say, you know, link to, would be something like user as sign-up path or something like that. And if you use single table inheritance, it would also try to write a class user as sign-up in there. But you don't want that. You know, you just want this thing that you want to instantiate for that one use case, but otherwise, for all other purposes, it should behave exactly like the normal user object or user class that you have. And then you can just put on all the other validations and stuff, and you're going to be fine. So now, let me go back there a bit. This seems a lot like magic, and actually it's kind of one of my favorite approaches that I never did, because it's just so easy to transition to. It comes with another dependency though, but you can basically just, you know, continue using it as before, but just pull out all the repeated validations and callbacks, which is very, very nice about this approach. And so I really, really like it. Third approach that we're going to talk about, change sets. And you see this, and you see it's not really. This is Elixir. So why am I going to tell you, like show you some Elixir code here, is because this is actually my favorite approach, And there is no Ruby library that implements change sets like this yet. Nobody has built yet. There are Ruby libraries like ROM that have something that is called change sets, but their usage is different than what change sets are on Elixir or Ecto, which is kind of like the database layer of Elixir, respectively. So I just want to show it to you because I think you can learn a lot from this, and I think it's really, really cool. First, real quickly, this is Elixir code. This is the pipe operator. And what the pipe operator basically does is it takes what we have up here, so our user data structure, and passes it in as the first argument to the cast function. And then whatever the cast function returns, which is a change set, it will pass it in as the first argument to validate required, and so on and so forth. And the other thing that's important here, which is something from the Phoenix web framework, which is kind of like the Rails of Elixir, is the accounts context. And what is cool about that, you can define multiple users kind of by default, and they just live in a different context. And because for registration or accounts, you want to have different validations and callbacks or something than maybe on payment, or when you would just want to interact with the user for logging purposes or whatnot. We'll come back to that in a second. So what is all this gibberish here actually? The cast function is kind of like strong parameters, so it says, okay, I get all these attributes, but of these attributes, the only attributes that you are allowed to change and use are email, password, and terms of service. Then we have a bunch of validations that sort of coincide with the ones we had before. We validate the email address is required, we validate that email and password are confirmed, we validate the length of the password, and we validate the acceptance of our terms of service. This is what we do here. And then afterwards, we have a callback where we hash our password. And that is sort of our after validation before save callback spot right there after all of this was done. So now you might tell me, like, but Toby, you always tell us here about we should separate things, you said this separate form object, and now you're mixing strong parameters, validations, and callbacks all into the same method, the same function. It seems like a very, very bad idea, bad programmer, Toby. So, and I just wanted to remember this. Like, all of this code was so intimately concerned with which data had changed or could possibly change to determine which validations or callbacks to actually execute. And I see that as a big smell. And so here, when I look at this, I think, do I have another? Ah, no, okay. So here, when I look at this, I can be certain what changed or what could have changed and what could not. Like, I know only email, password, and terms of service could have been changed. And so I also know that I only have to run my validations and callbacks, which are just normal function calls here, for these 3 attributes. Everything else I can ignore. Everything else I don't need to care about. And the other great thing about this is you can clearly see in which order this happens. With normal validations, like which order do the before validations, all of them trigger? You don't know. Or maybe you can guess, but you really don't know. And here it's very clear and explicit when what thing triggers and happens. The other thing is that they are combinable. So you can have a change set and you can then call out to another change set. So while here I only allow changing email, password, and terms of service, I can say, okay, you can change these. And then I call another change set which allows you to change your billing address. And then that runs all the validations and callbacks associated to billing address. So it's really composable. You can really pick and choose what you do, which is, when I said from my original goal, which is what I want. I want to be able to pick and choose which validations and callbacks run. And how do you use this then? You define this context, which is basically thinks it's your interface to the whole business domain. So it's a separate layer that then the controller calls into and then calls this create user function. And then here you call the registration change set. Then you call repo insert, which is just, it inserts into the database. In Ecto, every call to the database is explicit for the repo. And then after you inserted it successfully to the repo, transaction committed, you send a welcome email and you're done. So that was a quick glimpse into change set, Ecto, and Elixir. And now we have something different, which is completely separate operations and validators, which is something that's, well, not pioneered, but strongly pushed by like an architecture and or framework called Trailblazer. Has anyone heard of Trailblazer? A couple of people, cool. Which is basically, they say, a new architecture for Rails and web applications, and depending on who you ask, some people say they put the Java back into Ruby, but like, you know, I don't agree with that sentiment, but how does this look like? So we have a normal registrations controller, and then we have this call to an operation. Like you can kind of think of an operation as a service object, but it's not really a service object because it's more of a service object that then orchestrates things. So you define all these different steps in this operation that say like, okay, what do I need to achieve the goal of this one operation? Which is first set up the model, then we set up a form object, which is called a contract here. So let's have a look at this. Nice and tidy. This one uses reform, which is, by the way, a library for doing form objects, which you can also use separately. So instead of our step 1 active model thing, you could have used reform, or you can use reform. And then let's look at this. Oh, well, sorry. And you can just see here, we just define all the properties that we have, and then we have all validations. They look a bit weird as opposed to before, but still, you know, require the email field to be filled and confirmed and whatnot. So it's kind of easy, kind of. And then next step, we validate. After validation, as in the example before, we run hash password, then we save it, and then we send the welcome email. This is basically all there is to it. And just, you know, we now have a separate operations object, and we have still our separate kind of form object. And I just chose Trailblazer as an example here. And there's something in the documentation which I really, really like. So, which sort of shows their philosophy toward things. Models are persistence only and solely define associations and scopes. No business code is to be found here. No validations, no callbacks. So they take it rather far and just have, you know, all the business code goes into operations, the validations and callbacks go into a combination of operations and form objects. There's other groups in the Ruby community that push into a similar direction. This is Hanami, which is another, you know, smaller upcoming Ruby web framework, but I mean, it has existed for already 5 years or something. It's production ready, it's not that small. But this is from Hanami model, which is basically the kind of active record equivalent that I have. The architecture eases keeping the business logic entities separated from details such as persistence of validations, which I find kind of really intriguing. You know, it's just, you know, business logic is the most important thing. Persistence and validation, you know, that's details. You know, somebody else can care about that. I like the sentiment. I know this has been a lot, especially after already listening to like a 30-minute talk before, and now another 40 minutes of me. And now I tend to talk very fast, I'm sorry. But what can or should you take away from this? The first thing, and that's really important to me, is I don't hate Rails. I dislike people that go up on stage and make a career or something out of, you know, just, you know, diminishing other technology or bitching about technology. And I just want you to take away that it's not me. I have my problems with Rails, but at the same time, Rails is great and works very, very well for lots of people. I have these issues. I tried to show you ways how to solve them. Yeah. A valid question is now like, hey, maybe does this have a future in Rails, you know? Would that be good? And with future in Rails, I mean, like, I talked to you about that we only have model view controller. You know, I would be so happy if in the next version of Rails, the auto generator would just put a service objects folder and a form objects folder there with nothing inside. You know, just people say like, oh, you know, service objects and form objects, that's something we could use. That's a valid approach. Because I mean, I know what it's like, at least for me, especially early on when I learned Rails, when I did my web development, I was like, how should I solve this? I remember doing that exact same, you know, acceptance terms of service, and I was like, that's weird to have that idea. But I mean, if they have functionality for it, and I don't see anywhere else to put it, like, I'm going to use it. I'm going to do it that way. That's the Rails way. I want to do it the Rails way. So, you know, just adding these folders would be great for me. Does it have a future in Rails? Probably not. DHH, I respect him very much. He's done something grand. He's revolutionized web development as a whole. You can't deny that. And I won't claim to be any smarter than DHH, but I don't think he likes this, or he doesn't think this way. Like, he likes suppress. Like, he made the series DHH on web development or something like that. And before I gave this talk for the first time, I bit the sour apple and watched his episode about callbacks. And he was like, callbacks are great, they're so good. And where would I want to put this code? In a service object? No, it's really nice that it's here in the model. And then you look at it, and then there's an if condition with, I don't know, 3 or 4 clauses that even check if something is suppressed and whatnot, that then only then run, the goddamn callback. And he's like, this is fine, this is great. And here you suppress, it's awesome. And it's like, I think he has a very different mindset from where I'm coming from. And so I don't think it has a future in Rails, probably ever. Maybe. He's changed his mind before, but I don't think on this one. Maybe the most important thing to take away is this concept of affordances. I think it really helps my design process, especially like I do lots of open source stuff. And I think about, if I provide these functions, what does that communicate about how my library wants to be used? How do people want to interact with this if I write it this way versus the other way? What does this communicate? And think about it when you write your own code to be like, okay, what does this say? I think it's a very powerful concept that more people should know about, or maybe have a word for to talk about. We talked about alternatives. We talked about form objects that sit kind of inside your controller and then take all the validations and callbacks, put them in there, combine them maybe with a service object, separate it out this way. We talked about kind of the inheritance approach, which is kind of like a form object, except that it still inherits from your base model, so it's the closest to what you wrote before, which kind of obfuscates some of it, but it's very easy to change to using. We talked about change sets. You can all go and write Elixir now because we think change sets are awesome. But I think this idea of keeping what values are able to change very, very close in the code so that you can see it to what validations am I running and what callbacks am I running, I think is really, really powerful because it really helps me understand and be able to reason about the system. We talked about completely separate operations and then validators, which is sort of like the highest maintenance kind of approach and like the highest architecture kind of level approach with sort of the biggest change. But depending on the complexity of your code, it might very well be worthwhile. I have to issue a little warning here. Like the last time I used Trailblazer was maybe a year ago or something, and the documentation wasn't in the best of standings. I had to apply lots of use beta version and figure out that this documentation is wrong, that stuff. So don't take this as me recommending Trailblazer use. Please don't tell Nick that I said that, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but I think the architectural idea is more important, again, than the concrete library. And in the end, please be careful with all your validations and callbacks before you run into endless loops and requests that take way too long. That was me. I'm Tobi. Thank you.
Thank you, Tobi. I also have learned that it's probably your opinion that DHH should continue driving race cars, right?
No.
Okay, not even that. My first question is, all the pictures of the bunnies, are they your pets?
Yes.
Cool. Any further questions?
Berlin Bunny Trio on both Instagram and Twitter for these clients.
Cool. Any further questions? Is there anything? Jan, I'm looking into you. No, sorry. Didn't want to talk you into something.
I love this role.
Thank you.
So you said you don't hate Rails, but like your preferred approach is to use Elixir. That's awesome. That gives me a lot of food for thought. From your perspective, you mentioned the fat model approach, and this is something we've been doing what feels like forever, and I've seen in legacy code bases a lot. Would you advocate, and you also advocated service objects, sometimes called interactors for those who are not super familiar with the term. Would you say that like stuff like the repository pattern and a general separation of like process and data structures would make it easier even going forward with Rails? because a lot of people like working in the real world probably won't have the chance to just go to their tech leads, like going to Jan or something and just go like, Jan, let's rework it in Hanami. Like Tobi said, it's cool. Like they have a repository pattern and ROM and everything's better there. So would you say that we should just like first aim to reduce the fat model approach and basically reduce from the model?
Definitely, a very good question, thank you. I'm not a big believer in like the big rewrite or something. I think oftentimes the value that that brings is highly overestimated versus the cost that it incurs and doesn't make it that much better. So that's why I like to see and look like what can we do inside of Rails to make this better. And that's why I said that, you know, have the service objects, have the, or interactors, whatever you want to call them, and maybe the form objects, even with active model, which is, you know, baked into Rails, can help you make it better. And also before you do like any kind of like harsh big decisions, I would always want people to play with it, like use these patterns and see if they like it, because I mean, I'm very enthusiastic about them, I like them a lot, but I know people in teams that I work with, they weren't as convinced sometimes of, you know, using service objects or using form objects. So first get your feet wet, and then you can go from there. And I think I have another talk, more of an Elixir talk, where I talk more about this, but I think the better way usually to introduce these new technologies like Hanami or Elixir or something is in another project where like a new requirement comes up and you first start with like a small project introducing them before you go like some of the worst things seem like people, we barely know Elixir, but everybody says it's great. Okay, let's rewrite our main critical mission system in Elixir. That is like some of the dumbest thing I've ever kind of heard that people try to do. You first need to understand the basics a bit, like build a small project that is not mission critical in a new technology, gain experience with, because honestly, some things about new technologies will suck. That is better in your old technology, most definitely. Gain that experience, and then maybe we can talk about extracting parts out or replacing a big thing.
I think we have time for one more question, but it's also...
I'll also stick around and you can ask me stuff afterwards if you want to.
Okay, then please give a warm welcome, applause to, welcome Tobi!
Welcome, it's great that you're here. All right, thank you very much. I have learned one or two things about my company. I have learned that I have to question the future of DevOps. I have learned a long time ago that I shouldn't chat during work. And I think that I have learned that, well, having fat models is not a good idea in your code base. So that said, thank you very much for joining. It was a pleasure having you here. There's lots of pizza left. There's lots of drinks left. Feel free, enjoy. I have to say that we're planning for the third Aroundtech event, and you're invited. I would be super happy if you would join. It will take place in April. Until then, enjoy the evening. Thank you very much.